Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 7, Episode 2, The Postponement. Hello everyone. I hope everyone's doing okay out there. I'm doing well. I am sore. Just going to keep talking about going to the gym and just shredding because that's not annoying at all. I am very sore, but I feel awesome. I was actually supposed to have a massage today after my workout. When I signed back up for the gym, they gave me a gift certificate for the spa. And, well, I got a call about an hour before my appointment telling me that the masseuse was out sick. So, yeah, that kind of was a bummer, but oh, poor me. I didn't get a massage today, but I do admit I was looking forward to it. I was very much like, ooh, these muscles going to feel so good, especially when you're sore, right? Like when you're sore and someone's like kneading into those muscles. Oh, so great. But alas, it did not happen, which was actually, I think, a good thing because I have quite a bit to do. My daughter is going on Friday morning to Costa Rica on an 8th grade trip with her school. It's a STEM trip, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. I believe that's what STEM stands for. I hope it does. Anyway, let me know if it's totally wrong, but I think that's pretty much it. Anyway, so she's going on this Costa Rica trip, which we've been planning for a long time or preparing for a long time. She signed up months ago, so cannot believe it's here. I'm a bit stressed, but I'm also really excited for her to experience all the amazing things she's going to be experiencing down there. It's going to be a science-based trip, STEM-based. So I know it's just going to be something she's never going to forget. And I have to just put out of my mind that I will have zero contact with my firstborn child for 7 full days. So that's the part I have to just get over and how much I'm going to miss her. But it's mixed emotions, a mixed bag, if you will. But also, it's great that she's really excited because you don't want the child you're sending to be scared or stressed or like really nervous about it. She is like 1000% excited. In fact, she's like comforting me. She's like, don't miss me, Mom. I'll be fine. And she's like, I'll miss you too. But I'm like, she's such a sweetheart. And I'm like, no, this is just my issue. Don't worry about me. I'm sure she won't. I'm sure she'll forget about me as soon as I drop her off at the airport. So that's been on my mind. And what really would have helped me relax would have been a massage. But, that did not happen. Poor me. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. The synopsis for the postponement is as follows. George uses tears to get Susan to postpone their wedding date. Elaine confides her jealousy of George's engagement to a blabbermouth rabbi who lives in her building. Kramer sneaks an extremely hot cafe latte into a movie theater and proceeds to scald himself with it. A lawyer named Jackie Childs agrees to take Kramer's case, promising him millions in damages. This episode was written by Larry David. All right, we start out in the street. Again, this is the cold open, no more stand-up for Jerry in the beginning or end of the episode. So we start out seeing Kramer's car approaching an open spot that, from the looks of it, he shouldn't be able to fit into. And then we cut to Elaine going up to Jerry, who's at a newsstand, telling him that the dog problem has been solved. Apparently, there's a rabbi who lives in her building. He's a really nice guy. You've met him. And he's like, oh, isn't that the guy with the show on cable access? Yeah, that's him. So anyway, the rabbi talked to the owner and she agreed to keep the dog inside from now on. And then they stop talking because they hear slamming of bumpers, and it's Kramer just slamming his way into this spot. And they're just kind of watching this happen. And Jerry declares, that looks pretty good. Elaine says, he's in. My take on this scene. So last week I talked about exposition and how Larry David is so good with introducing the particulars of a storyline without sort of spelling it out so explicitly. Now, this scene kind of strays from that a bit, but it's not too extreme. It's not like really heavy-handed with the exposition. Since Elaine and Jerry have quite a bit of dialogue about the rabbi, that's why I'm mentioning it. It's really just like spelling out what happened. But again, it's not unrealistic. I can totally believe a couple of friends would be talking about this. And also the rabbi is integral to solving the dog problem. So it makes sense that Elaine would have to explain who he is to Jerry. So I'm not saying that this is too expositional or anything like that. But just because I had nerded out and talked about that in the last episode, I thought, oh, well, here's an example where it's not just so like organically kind of shown like it was in the last episode with Elaine screaming at the barking dog in her courtyard. A little bit more dialogue was necessary for this storyline to be explained. But hey, you know what? I'm good with it. And I love the Kramer parking and the he's in. It's a funny comment. All right, next we're back on the street, just a continuation. Literally, Jerry and Elaine are in the same position that they were in when they were watching Kramer. And Jerry says, we haven't discussed George's engagement at all. And she's like, what's to discuss? Come on, George is getting married. And Elaine asks if he's happy. And then we cut to Monk's, where George is returning from the bathroom to a booth where Susan is seated. And he's so annoyed. Why can't the stall doors go all the way down to the ground? And Susan thinks it's so that someone can tell if it's taken. Isn't that why we have locks on the doors? And she says, well, maybe it's a backup system in case the lock is broken. Well, George hates that explanation, says it's a complete breakdown of the system. And Susan wants to change the subject. Why? Is this a bad subject? George asks. No, if you want to keep talking about the doors, we can talk about them. He says, not that I want to keep talking about it, but it should resolve based on its own momentum. Well, I didn't think it had any momentum. Ooh, we hear George's thoughts. He can't believe he's marrying this woman. She doesn't even like me. Toilets were the subject. They don't even have the same interests. Right, next we're at Jerry's apartment and Elaine and Jerry enter. Jerry's like, yeah, he seems pretty happy. Really good transition there. I love that. Elaine has some groceries with her and some beers as well. And so she responds to Jerry saying that George is happy. And she says, well, that's all that matters, I guess. Jerry is suspicious. He feels Elaine should be more enthused or at least have something more to say. Well, I don't, she says, after taking a swig of beer. Jerry suspects she's a little jealous. Oh, what? You think I want to marry George? No, but Jerry thinks she wishes she was getting married. Oh, please, she says. That's the last thing I want. Lainey, Jerry, you don't want to get married? Yeah, that's right. I don't want to get married. Oh, come on. Oh, you come on. Oh, that's such... Well, Jerry's interrupted because Kramer enters. He sees Elaine and he tells her how this dog napping thing will be on their permanent record. And he is so upset by it. He'll never be able to get a job. Elaine doesn't seem to care. Oh, dear, is her reaction. Kramer is fired up. Aren't we allowed to make just one mistake, Jerry? And Jerry agrees. We got to change the system. Or he's humoring Kramer. I think that's more the case. Elaine gets up to leave, says she couldn't care less, and crushes the beer can on the counter. She's just sorry they didn't lock her up. She grabs the rest of the beers and exits. Jerry and Kramer look at each other like, ooh, yikes. All right, my take on this scene, I love this scene for so many reasons. The nature of this conversation between Jerry and Elaine, it's so fun. And I'm going to say it's a bit unorthodox for Seinfeld. I mean, it's not off-brand necessarily. I mean, I totally believe that Jerry and Elaine would have this conversation, but, it's kind of about something serious in the sense of like what you want out of life, marriage, no marriage. Also, JLD's performance is really great. She portrays that person who is trying so hard to deny something that's so obvious. She does it so well. And, Jerry just knowing something is off is another demonstration of how close they are. And I always know, like whenever I say stuff like this, I'm like, this interpretation is so touchy-feely, especially for a show like Seinfeld. But I don't know, just knowing these characters so well, it's so fun to see this type of exchange about something that, like I said, is kind of serious about, major life decisions. I like that we get to see their version of those conversations. And that's exactly what we see here. And I wanted to mention too, Elaine's entire vibe in this scene, not necessarily with her words, but just kind of, like I said, her general vibe is telling us how her mood will be for this episode. Even the, oh dear, response to Kramer, he's like really upset. He's trying to tell her something serious about their permanent record and, this crime that they committed together. And she's just like, I don't care, So we're seeing her actions really tell us her mood for the episode. Another example of really showing, not necessarily telling. So I really love that part of the scene as well. And then just the beer drinking is funny. I love how she grabs the remaining cans on the way out. All right, next we're on Elaine's building stoop. We see a rabbi walking out as Elaine arrives, and she greets him. Hello, Rabbi Kirschbaum. And he's delighted to see her. She thanks him again for taking care of that dog problem. And he says, there are often solutions to the problems in life. She reacts a bit indifferent to that wisdom. She's like, yeah, I suppose. The rabbi says to her, you seem a bit troubled. She agrees and admits, she's not really herself today. And he invites her up to have a chat. My take on this scene, so I feel like Elaine must be arriving home directly from Jerry's, from what we just saw back in Jerry's apartment. But she doesn't have the beer cans anymore. So I'm just going to assume that she drank the rest of the beers on the way home. So she basically slammed 3 beers on her way home. So it just tracks with her mood being so out of whack, and like maybe she's a little drunk now. I don't know. But I just love that, shouldn't she at least have the empty cans? No, she just slammed them, and I'm sure just threw out the cans in the garbage can. And then her interaction with the rabbi also makes sense. She's just been questioned by Jerry about her feelings, about George and the marriage. So it's top of mind. And so the rabbi is catching her right after that conversation and 3 or 4 beers. So yeah, of course, she's definitely not herself. All right, next we are in Jerry's apartment. George walks in on a mission and he sits down, asks Jerry for his honest opinion about something. Jerry's like, have I ever been less than forthright? And he says, no. Well, I don't know. Maybe you have. I don't know. And Jerry's like, well, yeah, of course I have. What am I talking about? So George presents his idea. Extend the doors on the bathroom stalls at Yankee Stadium all the way to the floor. Jerry repeats what he just said, and he says, yes, I like it. It's good, right? I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fantastic idea. I've always loved that moment. Apparently, it is a nod to Jackie Mason, the comedian. I did not know that. I learned that on the Notes About Nothing. So then George tells him that Susan didn't like that idea. In fact, she said, can we change the subject? Now, see, that I don't care for. It should resolve of its own volition. Oh, George is like, I said exactly the same thing, except I used the word momentum. Momentum, same thing. I guess, I don't even know if this is a segment or not, but just in the kind of list of things I've told you guys about where I quote Seinfeld almost daily, momentum, same thing, is something we say in this house quite a bit. The gymnastics and ninja place where my kids used to go to was named Momentum. So I couldn't really talk about their lessons or drive them to momentum without being like, momentum, same thing. And I'm sure my kids hated it. Hey, George starts panicking. He's getting married in December. Jerry's like, yeah, I know. Well, he can't do it. His stomach's in knots. His neck is killing him. Look, he can't turn. You're turning, Jerry says. No, it's not a good turn. December. He thinks he just needs more time. Jerry says you should have more time if you need. George asks, is that something I could do? I could postpone it? Sure you can. I don't see why not. God, Jerry's such a shit stirrer. And George is relieved. In fact, he has the perfect date. March 21st, the first day of spring. Things blooming, rejuvenation, rebirth, all that crap. Beautiful, Jerry says. And George lets that sink in. She's not going to like it. No, she's not. And George admits that he is scared of Susan. Well, she is a woman. They don't like to be disappointed, Jerry says. Well, whatever. George has to do it. He can't make December. You can see that. Yeah, you better shoot for March, Jerry says. And you're going to back me up on this? Oh, all the way. Kramer enters. And George is like, you're a really good friend, Jerry. Even if you murdered someone, I wouldn't turn you in. And then George leaves. Jerry is so flattered. Asks Kramer, hey, would you turn me in if I murdered someone? Kramer says, definitely. And he wouldn't hesitate. Jerry can't believe it. You're supposed to be a friend of mine. Well, what kind of person goes around killing people? Well, I'm sure I had a good reason. I may be next, Kramer says. But you know me. I thought I did. All right, next we're at the rabbi's apartment. Elaine thanks the rabbi for taking the time to talk to her. She admits to him she's not of his faith and actually not a very religious person, but she does feel that she's in need of some guidance. He offers her some Snackwells and he goes on and on about how low-fat cookies are a bit misleading because of the high-calorie content that people may indulge more because they're low-fat. He goes on about that for a little bit, and Elaine's like, no, I'm not hungry. Anyway, she tells him that this friend of mine, George, just got engaged. How wonderful. Yeah. Elaine explains that for some reason, she finds herself overcome with feelings of jealousy and resentment. The rabbi wonders, well, doesn't this bring you any joy that your friend is partaking in the holiest of unions? No, it doesn't. No joy whatsoever. The whole thing just makes me sick. So the rabbi is trying to give her some wisdom. Sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Elaine cuts him off. And she explains, see, the thing is, Rabbi, it should have been me. I'm smart. I'm attractive. And the rabbi tries to suggest, setting her up with some eligible bachelors at the temple. Oh, including his nephew. She says, no, I don't think so. Well, his nephew owns a flower store. Very successful. Elaine's just rubbing her eyes in frustration. My take on this scene, I think it's a really fun scene. I love resentment Elaine. We have a new Elaine here. This George engagement has really gotten under her skin. And I do love that it's easier for her to chat about this with a relative stranger than with her good friends, which, considering who her good friends are, totally makes sense. JLD's performance is just perfect. I love the look on her face when she's expressing how there's no joy whatsoever. And that physicality moment of the gagging motion. It's so incredible. Just such intensity and commitment to those emotions. And of course, this is what JLD does so well. She's acting with her whole body. Yes, the physicality. Even though she's sitting, she's doing the most she can with that upper body of hers. And it just makes the performance that much richer. I love when she says, yeah, I don't know what that means. It's really funny. And the rabbi, he does the thing that men do so often where they hear an issue and then they just want to find a solution right away. She's not looking to get set up, Rabbi. You don't need to include her in any of these singles functions or pimp out your florist nephew. Do that with someone else. That's not what Elaine needs right now. All right, next we're on the street. Jerry is waiting for Kramer, who exits a coffee shop, and it's still bothering him that Kramer would turn him in. He tells him he's nothing but a stoolie, admit it. Kramer says, hey, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Jerry notices he's having another cafe latte. When did you become so trendy? And Kramer insists he starts the trends. He's been drinking cafe lattes since he was in 5th grade and never looked back. And Jerry notices a flyer for Plan 9 from Outer Space, the same movie he never got to see in the Chinese restaurant episode. So he and Kramer make plans to go. Jerry opens a stick of gum and the wrapper drops on the ground, and Kramer picks it up and points out that he's littering. Well, why don't you turn me in? Maybe I will. All right, next we are in George's apartment. George enters and Susan's on the couch. Hey, how's your day? The Susan greeting. He greets her. So what's going on? She says. Nothing, he says. Went to Jerry's. Oh, the Lowers want to get together with us on Friday night. Ugh, George isn't so thrilled. The Lowers, really? You don't want to go? Oh, no, I want to go, he says. So what did Jerry have to say? George is like, nothing much, just talking. Finally, George gets up the nerve. Oh, I had an unbelievable idea today. Oh, yeah, the toilets, you told me. No, George says, not the toilets. So he drops the bomb. How about we get married March 21st, the first day of spring? You want to postpone it? And he tries to sell her on the beauty of it all, and then it doesn't work. She breaks down. If you don't want to marry me, George, just say so. Just say so. Oh, he's like, no, still marry. So she starts sobbing, and George can't handle it, and he just gives in. Yeah, we'll get married at Christmas. Snow, Santa, all that stuff. All right, next we're at Monk's. And Jerry guesses correctly. Let me guess. She cried and you caved. How did you know? I live and breathe, my friend. I live and breathe. And George says how intense it was. It was like she was on fire and he was just trying to put her out. Jerry understands, those powerful tears. Few men have the constitution for it. But he does point out you probably had some good makeup sex. George didn't have any sex. Well, Jerry can't believe it. He points out makeup sex is the only sex perk, I guess you could say, in a committed relationship. And George is so pissed. I missed out on the makeup sex. Jerry says the only sex better than makeup sex, conjugal visit sex. Yes, George agrees. That is happening. And then they hear a woman at the next table sobbing, like really crying so hard. And her boyfriend acknowledges how upset she is, but, he tells her, I'm not going. George cannot believe it. Look at this guy. He's eating a sandwich. He goes, you going to eat those fries? As she's still sobbing. Well, George gets inspired. He gets up and shakes the man's hand and thanks him. I'm going back in. And he turns to pat the woman on the shoulder. Feel better. So the actress here is Evie Peck. She plays the crying woman. She's also appeared in Tenacious D, the television show, and the movie Pick of Destiny. Also Brothers and Sisters and... We have a Gilmore Girls Seinfeld connection. Evie Peck played Karen, Richard Gilmore's secretary that Lorelai finds him after he starts his own firm. So she was in Gilmore Girls. I think she does a great job crying. It's a bit cartoonish, but I think it's supposed to be. So great crying, Evie Peck. All right, next we are on Elaine's building stoop again. And Jerry arrives as the rabbi is leaving, and they greet each other. How does this evening find you? Well, Rabbi, well. The rabbi says to Jerry, I hope Elaine's feeling better. Jerry asks what he means. And then the rabbi blabs that the engagement of her friend George has left her feeling bitter and hostile. Is that so? And that she wishes she was the one getting married. Really? Yeah, came off as pretty desperate. Jerry says, I didn't know any of this. She doesn't seem to think much of this George. I remember the word loser peppered throughout our conversation. And Jerry says, well, this is all news to me. All right, we're back in George's apartment. George is going back in, like he said. So he enters, same thing. Hey, how's your day? They have a little kiss. So what's going on? George is so nervous. And he asks, could I talk to you for a moment? So George sits on the couch with her and he says, well, this is the thing. As he's getting ready to talk, he just gets so emotional and breaks down. He says he can't do this in December. And he blubbers about being frightened and scared. And he promises he can do it in March. He just needs a little bit more time. Oh, Susan is so moved. She gives him a big hug. Of course, it can wait till March if you want. Oh, she hugs him and comforts him. And he cannot believe it. All right, next we're in Elaine's apartment. Elaine's like, let me get that magazine article I told you about. So she walks back to her bedroom. And Jerry is, of course, just loving all the juicy gossip he got from the rabbi. That's his whole vibe in this scene. He's like, I ran into the rabbi. Understand that you talked with him as well. Yeah, we talked earlier, she said. Oh, I know. Elaine pops out. You know? What does that mean? He didn't mention our conversation. Yes, he did. Elaine is horrified. And Jerry kind of sums it up. Jealous of George. Wish you were getting married instead of him. How could a rabbi have such a big mouth? That's what's so fascinating, Jerry says. My take on this scene, it's funny. Jerry gets most of the comedy here. A lot of just Elaine reactions. But this is a necessary scene to move the story forward. And I sort of feel bad for her here. Poor Elaine just needed to get her feelings out. This dumbass rabbi has to blab to pretty much the worst person to blab to, Jerry, who only feels joy about all of this. All right, next we're at the movie theater. Jerry and Kramer are in line for the movie. Jerry tells him he can't take his cafe latte into the theater. There's no outside drinks allowed. Well, that's a stupid rule. And we'll see about that, Kramer says, and he slips the cup into his pants. Back at the rabbi's apartment, Elaine arrives, and Rabbi is so happy to see her and offers her, of course, more snacks. But she wants to get right to it. She asks him, why did you tell Jerry about what they talked about? Was that a problem for you? Of course it was a problem for me, she says. She asks if he told anyone else. Well, turns out, yeah, pretty much the whole building knows, including Don Ramsey, the cute guy on the 5th floor. Oh, Elaine is so distraught. My take on this scene, just more great Elaine reactions. I love how she confronts him. And again, poor Elaine. Next, we're back at the movie theater. Jerry and Kramer are making their way to their seats, and Kramer stumbles over a couple of people and burns the crap out of his stomach. An usher comes over to see what the disturbance is. He asks, "You got one of those cafe lattes in your shirt?" No, Kramer lies. "I don't have anything. Ask him." And he points to Jerry. Well, Jerry rats him out, does a little drinking motion, and the usher throws him out. "Let's go, coffee boy." All right, next we're back at Jerry's apartment. Elaine is telling Jerry how the rabbi told everyone in the building, and that cute guy from the 5th floor could barely bring himself to nod to her. And Jerry tries to convince her, this is no reflection on the Jewish people's ability to keep a juicy nugget of gossip to themselves. She confirms that he didn't tell anything to George. "No," he says, and repeats all of her feelings. "Yeah, so what?" Then George enters, and Elaine just turns it on. "Georgie, congratulations!" Oh, gives a big hug. She says, "I haven't seen you since it happened." Oh, she couldn't be happier for him. Oh, he says, "Thanks a lot." "Oh, come on. You really, really deserve it." Gives him a couple kisses on the cheek. "Well, deserve? I don't know about that." "Oh, are you kidding? I've seen the changes in you the last couple of years, man. You've grown. You've matured." "I guess I'm getting older." "Oh, well, she just thinks it's wonderful, but she's got to run. But please," she says, "give my heartfelt best to Susan." Then George offers, if you ever get a date, maybe we can go on a double. Yes. In fact, wasn't there a guy in your building, someone on the 5th floor? Yes. She closes the door. She's something. Yeah, she's something else. And Jerry's wondering if he stood his ground, and George says, "Well, no, I wept like a baby, and it worked. The wedding is postponed." Jerry can't believe it. "You cried?" "I bawled uncontrollably." And he marvels at the power of these tears. Kramer enters, and Jerry apologizes to him about the movie thing. "I was just joking around." "Sorry," Kramer says, "you just did me a favor." Kramer says he spoke to a lawyer. He's suing the coffee shop for millions because the coffee was too hot. It's supposed to be hot. Not that hot. And there's a tag to this episode where George and Susan stumble onto the rabbi's show on TV, and he's telling the story about Elaine and let's call her friend George. Says how she's overwhelmed with feelings of resentment and hostility about his engagement, and pretty much feels this loser shouldn't be married before her. And she also mentioned how George didn't think that going to a prostitute while engaged was cheating. They're never going to see each other again. So what's the difference? Ooh, and Susan and George are just staring at the TV in shock. All right, my take on that last scene of the episode. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. It's just such a masterful performance by JLD here. We've had nothing but miserable Elaine for the entire episode. And now to see that fakeness that she just amps up for George, it's so entertaining. And this is totally weird and strange, I'm sure, but I love to see like those little affectionate moments. I know it's just because she's putting this on and she's playing up this whole act, but the hug and the kisses on the cheek, it just adds so much to what she's doing here. The sheer commitment to the charade is amazing and such a great performance. And I love the sum up from Jerry. Yeah, she's something else. Oh, and I also love her hair in this scene. I think it's very cute. All right, I'm going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side. You got the ring. You popped the question. Maybe you got down on one knee in front of a family, or perhaps you spelled it out in rose petals. However it happened, you are engaged to be married. But that wedding date is approaching a bit too fast for your comfort. You don't want to break up, but you don't want to walk down the aisle just yet. Well, then you need to call the wedding jammer. Hello, I'm Bucky Bershcom. As a former divorce mediator, I have extensive experience with unhappy women, which makes me an expert in all of your wedding postponement needs. I get it. I know you're scared of your fiancés. So when you find your stomach in knots and your neck not turning so good because you're not ready, you can leave all that stress behind with the Wedding Jammer. First, you will have a free consultation with a Wedding Jammer agent to understand what makes your fiancé tick, which will inform what type of postponement scenarios may work best. For example, if you're engaged to a very superstitious woman, perhaps the wedding date she chose has been proven to be common for most divorced couples. That'll buy you at least another month. Or if your fiancé wants a live band at the reception, maybe all of a sudden every local wedding band is in rehab for heroin. That's a delay of at least 90 days. Whatever postponement scenario you decide to go with, you can rest assured none of the delay will be your fault. You can just be the hero, comforting your dear bride for all of the bad luck. Wink, wink. Look, you're not a bad guy. You just need a little bit more time to get to know this lady you're gonna marry. Call the Wedding Jammer today and we will endure all the yelling and tears on your behalf. The Wedding Jammer. Here comes the bride. But not yet. And we're back. There were some extras I wanted to mention for this episode. First, the commentary was done by none other than JLD and Jason Alexander. And there were just a few things I wanted to mention. For the most part, they just watch and laugh and don't say a lot. But they had a few comments that I thought were worth mentioning on the pod. Jason Alexander talks about during that scene with Susan when we hear the voiceover, I'm marrying this woman? She doesn't even like me. He just says, God, it was never easy to know what to do with your face with the voiceover moments. That always made him uncomfortable, he says. And then I just thought this was sweet. Jason Alexander kind of goes on and gushes about how fit and beautiful JLD looks. He kind of makes this comment, I'm done with my babies. I'm working out. And she just laughs. And okay, well, before I say this next comment that they talked about, I feel like I've been saying it this whole way because I think I'm just prone to saying it the way Michael Richards does. But anyway, the cafe latte, or how does he say it? Cafe latte, the way Michael Richards says it in the episode, they're like, he would always do that. Something was just a bit off with the way he would pronounce things. Like, apparently he'd never say California, he'd say California. And they couldn't figure out if that was just his natural quirk or he was doing it to sort of amuse them. They never really figured it out, but I thought that was really funny because every time he said cafe latte in the episode, they chuckled about it. They're like, gosh, that just Michael in that way, he would just say things a bit off. I thought this was fascinating. Jason Alexander said that scene where they witnessed the woman crying and the guy just totally indifferent to it over at the next table at Monk's was inspired by a real life scenario Jason Alexander had seen in a restaurant and he had told Larry David about, except the couple were two huge Hollywood stars. Of course, he didn't name who they were, but he was like, they were huge movie stars. And the woman was just sobbing, like uncontrollably sobbing. And the guy just couldn't have had any less of a reaction. He just was acting like nothing was wrong and eating off of her plate, like just eating his meal, eating off her plate while she's like having a breakdown. So that scene was inspired by that very story that he told Larry David, which I thought was really fascinating. And how much do you want to know who the hell that couple was? In the notes about nothing, there were a few things I wanted to mention. I always wondered why Jerry just kind of stops by Elaine's apartment before he meets up with Kramer. Well, apparently Elaine was supposed to join them for the Plan 9 from Outer Space movie, but after hearing about the rabbi's big mouth, she expresses she's not in the mood to go anymore and she would rather, confront the rabbi. Well, in the scene where Elaine confronts the rabbi, it was supposed to open with him on the phone before she arrives. And we're supposed to hear him say, "No, I never said that. Yes, I did say the part about having sex in the car, but I never mentioned stealing the CD. I don't know where you got that from." I don't know what that means. I have no idea. I think maybe it's supposed to illustrate how gossipy the rabbi is, of course. But anyway, that's how the scene was supposed to start before Elaine comes to the door. So sticking with that scene, the confrontation scene, it was supposed to end with Elaine pleading with the rabbi not to mention what she had told him about illegally deducting her apartment rent as an office on her tax return. And he replies, "Well, here's the thing. It just so happens an old friend of mine works for the IRS." And Elaine buries her face in her hands. And then I feel like this is well known amongst, well, I guess really, really diehard Seinfeld fans, but the woman next to Michael Richards in the theater, the one he steps over when he falls, that reaction is not acting. She apparently got really hurt during the scene. Her foot got badly injured. So all of that wincing you see for that poor woman, that poor extra, was very real. All right, now it's time to open Greg's sack lunch. Greg is our most dedicated contributor to this podcast, and every week he sends in his sack lunch full of thoughts for each episode. And this week, I find first in the sack his overall thoughts. He says, "I like how this episode really just follows up the previous one and how I thought Elaine should have more to say about George's engagement. This almost could have been just a 2-part episode, but they split it up. This is somewhat of a momentous episode for me, and I usually forget it exists." Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I do. I like that too. You know, even just mentioning the whole dog problem. That's how we opened the episode. So I was kind of curious, and I was hoping there would be some more explanation, because this is an episodic show, which is to say it's not a series, which means in a Seinfeld type show, you don't necessarily need to have seen previous episodes to understand what's going on. So, you know, in a series, like a soap opera or any kind of drama, like there's a whole arc where it's like, hey, if you haven't seen the previous 3-4 episodes, you might be a little bit lost. But in episodic television, that's not the case. Everything's just kind of within itself. Like I think The Simpsons is the perfect example of that, you know, because they're cartoons, obviously, they can't even age or anything. Everyone's like the same age, the same kind of chunk of time or time period, whatever it is, but nothing really changes or evolves. But everything's episodic. So it is a little bit rare for there to be such a like continuation. But I agree with you, Greg. I do like that is how they started this episode, and that it kind of flows into the next. All right, next in Greg's sack lunch are his favorite scenes and Elaine moments. Greg says, "My favorite Elaine moment is when she is talking to Jerry and Kramer and she crushes the Budweiser can and then slings the rest of the pack over her shoulder. There's something very sexy about this." Oh, Greg, sexy, huh? I'm not sure if I found it sexy, but I definitely found it very entertaining. Greg goes on to say, "I love the scene where Elaine, in an attempt to save face after the rabbi blabbed her secret feelings of resentment, acts over the top happy for George. Because I love these two the most of all, I love when they are on great terms. Her approval seems to mean a lot to him, as he's scared of her most of the time." Jerry knows it's fake, which makes it even funnier. "I wish we could see her face once she left the apartment, especially after George says if you ever get a date to her and she has to refrain from choking his ass." Oh my gosh. Yes, I agree with everything you said here. I mean, it is cute how her approval, I didn't even think about that, albeit fake, the gushing and that, that congratulations. Yeah, it's very sweet. He's like, "Oh man, thanks." Like, it's so cute. And to your point, Greg, yes, he is afraid of Elaine most of the time. He's afraid of Susan. I mean, like, he's afraid of most women. Like he says in, did he already say it? Whatever. He says in some episode, he's thousands, that beautiful women are what, Godzilla, and he's thousands of fleeing Japanese. It's so funny, but it's totally George. He's afraid of these women. So when they're giving him any sort of validation or compliment, I mean, he's just going to melt. So that's also what makes the scene work so well. Next is Greg's scene swap idea. He says, George and Jerry have a lot of long discussions about this postponement, and I love it all. While I get why Elaine was not a part of this so that she can have her big moment of congratulations to George, I just want more of her input on how these two knuckleheads talk about dealing with women. Also, Kramer has so little in this episode, I don't get why they didn't involve him more with George's story. Yeah, those are all really good points. It's so funny you said what you just said, Greg, about Elaine. Like she couldn't be part of the whole postponement conversation because of the payoff of her like big congratulations scene. I totally addressed that as well in my thoughts, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But you know, you and I are totally on the same page. I don't mind Kramer's storyline. I mean, yeah, it is pretty little, but once again, we expand on it in the next episode. So just as we didn't see a lot of Elaine's reaction to the engagement in the first episode, it gets expanded in the second. And then we get this little like teaser for the coffee stuff, you know, the burn and all that stuff. And then it expands more in the next episode. So it's an interesting sort of, and of course, I think it's the first 3 episodes were written by Larry David for this season. So, cause he really wanted to set the tone for this whole George engagement storyline and everything. So that's really interesting, how he kind of structured that. He's like, okay, I'll give little teasers. I'll kind of set it up in this episode. And then the next episode is when I'm going to expand on it. But yeah, I don't know. I think purely because Jackie Childs is coming up very soon, I have no complaints about the cafe latte storyline. And finally, in Greg's sack are his extra thoughts. He says, what the hell is up with this rabbi? He pushes Elaine to talk to him at his place, then tries to set her up on a date, then gossips about her to Jerry and everyone else in the damn building? Screw this guy. Elaine should have Newman kidnap him and drop him off in the country. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, exactly. The dog is nothing compared to this stupid rabbi. I do love this actor's performance. And of course, I don't have his name available right now. I do know that this actor was really good friends with Larry David in real life. In fact, they were on that show Fridays together. They were castmates and writers together. So yeah, Larry brought him on to be the rabbi. And I think he's so funny. Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in your thoughts. And now it's time to close Greg's sack lunch. Okay, moving on to my favorite Elaine moments. I love the entire scene with George and her fake excitement. But to narrow down within that scene what I love the most, it's that tail end of when she's repeating, yes, 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 in the doorway. If anything was going to sort of crack this whole giddy act of, for George, it was that moment. And you can see it in her face very subtly, her considering whether or not to punch his lights out because of his whole, if you ever get a date thing. I mean, it's just brilliant. You just see that in her face. She's still smiling, but it's like, holy shit. She's going to scream, and that's why she has to get out of there. Such a brilliant performance by JLD. And a close second would be just a small moment where she goes, Jerry. I just think it's funny. All right, and my final notes for the episode. Again, we have a side story for Elaine in a very George-centric episode. I mean, this is all about George and Susan's wedding getting postponed. And once again, call out to Jason Alexander. Fantastic performance. JLD does get, a bit of a shaft here. I wish she did get a little bit more plot. I'd swap out some of the cafe latte stuff and include Elaine maybe in the postponement plot, but just as Greg pointed out, and as I was writing these notes, it would, I understood that would totally change the tone of her mood. And we wouldn't get that awesome last scene with her and George. So I'm having second thoughts about it, but just the thought of maybe her mood could change once she sees how unhappy George is, like at least have Jerry mention to her that he wants to postpone it. And then maybe we keep everything the same where she's really upset, has a conversation with the rabbi, he blabs. But then maybe Jerry does drop the little hint right before George arrives, like, well, actually, he wants to postpone it. He's having second thoughts or something. So that would shift her mood, right? Like she'd be like, oh, okay, you know what? This thing's never going to happen anyway. Why am I getting so upset? Anyway, that scene swap is kind of pointless because, again, that scene where she just goes over the top with her congratulations, it's one of the most brilliant scenes of the entire series. So keep everything the same. It's fine. George and Elaine, I mean, they have the most entertaining relationship of the main four. And I just love seeing all the different levels. Elaine wouldn't have this harsh of a reaction about Kramer or Jerry getting married. Jerry getting married may bring out some other emotions, but not the same as George. It's because it's George. She thinks he's such a loser, and it's an insult to her that he's getting married before her. So this is a very only specific reaction she'd have to George because of their just really unique relationship. And so that's just part of why this storyline is so fantastic for both of them. Overall, it's a really, really fun episode. I enjoy so much about it. And Heidi Swedberg, I think people say it differently, but I have to point her out too. I think I also find the need to really praise her too. And it's not inauthentic. I really do think she plays Susan perfectly. But for those of you who may not be aware, a lot of bad things were said about her by Jason Alexander in a few interviews or something a few years ago. Really shitty things, honestly, to say about a former cast member, especially when you've made enough money from this show for generations of your family to be set. And yet you have to kind of shit on someone who was just, a featured player and definitely doesn't have the same kind of power you had in the show. So anyway, I just thought it was bad form for Jason Alexander to do that. So I just wanted to kind of give Heidi Swedberg a shout out because I don't understand where he's coming from in his criticism of her, which was basically saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know how to play against her. She was so impossible. You could never understand what the choices she made meant, or they didn't make sense to me, the choices she would make in her performances. Now, he did kind of backtrack on all that stuff once he got some bad publicity about that, saying hey, that was really shitty of you to say. And I think she even made a statement it was pretty hurtful for her to hear that, after all those years, because she had a great experience on this show. So she was sort of it just really surprised her and kind of came out of nowhere. So Jason Alexander kind of backtracked and was look, that was really unfair of me to say those things. And looking back, it was my own insecurity with my own performance. And so it was my issue. In rewatching the show, I can totally see the George and Susan relationship was portrayed perfectly. And that was because she was so awesome. So anyway, he backtracked and really kind of laid it on thick that it was his issue, not her issue. All that to say, I love her performance. Hey, how was your day? Oh, so fun. Yes, so fun episode overall, but just I needed more Elaine. And I think that's all I can say about the postponement. Please make sure to follow Hot and Heavy on social media. On Instagram, it's @HotHeavyElaine. On TikTok, @ElaineBennisPodcast. And if you'd like to email me, please do at elainepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.